In eastern California, where the land sinks below sea level, Death Valley extends across a wide basin of salt and rock. The surface appears still from a distance. Pale flats stretch outward without interruption, framed by mountain ranges that hold their shape in the heat. Movement is slow here. Sound travels without obstruction, then fades. Temperatures in the valley rise beyond what most environments sustain. In summer, the air carries no moisture. Shade exists only where rock interrupts the sun. Water is scarce and unevenly distributed, often limited to isolated springs or seasonal runoff. Distances between these points are long and uncertain. Maps describe the terrain, but they cannot reflect the condition of a road or whether a path remains passable. There are routes that cross the valley floor and climb into surrounding hills. Some are maintained. Others are remnants of older passages, once used for mining or access, now left to erode. Tire tracks can remain visible for days, sometimes longer, depending on wind. They suggest direction, but offer no guarantee of destination. Visitors arrive with preparation. They carry water, fuel, and marked routes. Park guidance advises against deviation. The environment does not correct mistakes. It allows them to continue. In this setting, isolation is not immediate. It develops gradually, often without clear transition. A wrong turn does not signal danger at once. It extends distance. It separates intention from outcome. In July 1996, two travelers entered this landscape. Their route was not unusual. Their vehicle was functional. The conditions were consistent with the season. Nothing at the outset suggested that their path would end differently from others who passed through. In the summer of 1996, Eagle Alex Torgerson and Emily Sweeney were traveling together through the western United States. Their journey was part of a broader trip, moving across several states by car. They were not residents of the region, but they had access to maps and general travel information available at the time. Torgerson, often referred to as Alex, was a visitor from Norway. His background placed him far from desert environments. Much of his experience was shaped by colder climates, where navigation and survival conditions differ significantly. Sweeney, an American, was more familiar with the country but not necessarily with the specific demands of remote desert travel. Their experience level in extreme heat environments is not fully documented. They were traveling in a rented vehicle, a standard passenger car not designed for off-road conditions. Rental agreements of that period typically restricted travel to paved roads, though enforcement depended on circumstance. Vehicles were equipped for general highway use, not for remote or unmaintained terrain. Their route brought them toward Death Valley National Park during a period of intense summer heat. Travel advisories for the area consistently warned visitors about the risks of dehydration, vehicle failure, and navigation errors. Park services recommended carrying large quantities of water, avoiding travel during peak heat hours, and remaining on established roads. It is not fully documented how closely these guidelines were followed. Records suggest that the pair had some supplies, but the exact quantity of water and provisions remains uncertain. What is clear is that their preparation did not match the extended demands that would later arise. The plan, as understood from available evidence, involved crossing the region by vehicle. There is no indication that they intended to stop for long periods or leave the car under normal circumstances. Their journey was structured around continuous movement, with the expectation of reaching the next destination within a predictable time frame. Navigation tools in 1996 relied primarily on printed maps. These maps showed main roads and some secondary routes, but they did not always reflect current conditions. Roads marked on paper could be degraded, blocked, or no longer maintained. In desert terrain, this difference is significant. As they moved deeper into the region, the distinction between maintained and unmaintained routes became less clear. Signage could be limited or absent. Intersections might not be marked. A turn taken with confidence could lead away from reliable passage. At some point during their travel, they left a main road. The reason for this decision is not precisely recorded. It may have been a navigational error, a misreading of a map, or an attempt to take a shorter or more direct route. There is no evidence of deliberate risk-taking beyond that decision. From that moment, Their journey shifted from planned travel to uncertainty. The environment remained the same. The conditions did not change, but their position within it did. The transition from maintained road to unmaintained track was gradual. In desert terrain, the difference is not always immediate. A paved surface narrows, becomes gravel, then fades into compacted earth. Tire marks suggest continuity. The route appears usable. At some point in July 1996, the vehicle carrying Egil Alex Torgerson and Emily Sweeney left a primary road within Death Valley National Park and entered a secondary path. The exact intersection is not definitively recorded, but later investigation indicates they may have traveled along routes such as Warm Springs Canyon or similar mining roads that extend into remote areas. These roads were not designed for standard passenger vehicles. They were uneven, with loose rock, sand, and sharp inclines. Maintenance was minimal or absent. In dry conditions, the surface could appear stable while concealing softer ground beneath. As they continued, the terrain became more restrictive. The surrounding mountains limited visibility. The path narrowed and showed fewer signs of recent use. There were no services, no marked exits, and no reliable indication of distance to a main road. At some stage, the vehicle became immobilized. Evidence found later suggests it may have been due to mechanical failure, terrain obstruction, or a combination of both. Tires in such environments are vulnerable to damage. Engines are subject to overheating under sustained high temperatures, especially at low speeds and on inclines. Once the vehicle stopped, the situation changed. In desert survival conditions, a functioning vehicle serves as shelter, a signal marker, and a resource container. Without mobility, it becomes a fixed point in an open landscape. The decision that followed is not fully documented, but it is central to the outcome. Standard survival guidance advises remaining with the vehicle. It is easier for search teams to locate a stationary object than individuals moving through open terrain. At some point, they chose to leave it. The direction they selected is inferred from later discoveries. It appears they attempted to walk out of the canyon, likely seeking a main road or visible landmark. Distances in such terrain are difficult to judge. What appears close can require hours of travel, especially under heat conditions exceeding 45 degrees Celsius. From that moment, their survival depended on physical endurance, available water, and navigation without reliable reference points. The vehicle remained behind, stationary and visible. They did not. Once they left the vehicle, Egil Alex Torgerson and Emily Sweeney entered a phase where movement replaced stability. The decision altered their exposure to the environment. Without the car, they no longer had shade beyond what the terrain could provide. Their supplies became limited to what they could carry. The terrain around them consisted of dry canyon paths, uneven rock, and open stretches where the ground reflected heat upward. Movement in such conditions requires pacing, but urgency often overrides caution. The available evidence suggests they began walking during daylight hours, likely in an attempt to cover distance quickly. Water, in desert survival, determines duration. The human body loses moisture continuously through sweat and respiration, even when activity is limited. Under temperatures common to Death Valley in July, this loss accelerates. Without sufficient intake, dehydration begins within hours. It is not fully known how much water they carried when they left the vehicle. Reports indicate it was not enough to sustain extended travel. As they moved forward, consumption would have been necessary, reducing their reserves with each hour. Their route appears to have followed the natural lines of the canyon. This is consistent with general navigation instincts. Canyons can lead toward lower elevations where roads or settlements may exist. However, they can also branch, loop, or terminate without exit. Without a map aligned to their exact position, each turn introduced uncertainty. The physical demands increased over time. Walking on uneven ground requires more energy than movement on flat surfaces. Heat adds strain to the cardiovascular system. The body attempts to regulate temperature through sweating, but this mechanism depends on available fluid. As dehydration progresses, sweating decreases, reducing the body's ability to cool itself. Evidence later recovered suggests they attempted to maintain direction rather than wander. Personal items and remains were found along a general path, rather than scattered widely. This indicates a continued effort to move with purpose, even as conditions worsened. At some point, their pace would have slowed. Fatigue in desert conditions is not only muscular, it affects judgment. Decision-making becomes less precise. Distances may be misjudged. Landmarks can appear closer than they are, or shift in perception due to heat distortion. There are indications that they sought shade when possible. Rock overhangs, canyon walls, or even minimal shadows can reduce direct sun exposure. However, such relief is temporary and often limited in area. As the sun moves, shade disappears or relocates, requiring further movement to maintain it. Night offers reduced temperatures, but it introduces different challenges. Visibility decreases. Terrain becomes harder to navigate safely. It is not confirmed whether they traveled during night hours or chose to rest. Both options carry risks. Rest conserves energy, but delays progress. Movement in darkness risks injury. As dehydration advances, the body undergoes measurable changes. Thirst intensifies, the mouth becomes dry, skin loses elasticity, heart rate increases, cognitive function declines. In severe cases, confusion and disorientation develop. The available record does not document their exact physiological state at each stage. However, the environment and duration allow reasonable inference. By the second day without adequate water, physical condition would have deteriorated significantly. There is evidence that they attempted to discard non-essential items. This is a common response when individuals seek to reduce carried weight. Objects found along their route included personal belongings that would not have been abandoned under normal circumstances. The act of leaving them behind suggests an effort to conserve energy for continued movement. Their clothing would have offered limited protection. Standard travel attire is not designed for prolonged desert exposure. Light clothing can reduce heat absorption, but it does not prevent dehydration or sunburn. Footwear, if not suited for rough terrain, increases the risk of injury. The landscape provided few reliable resources. Natural water sources in that region are rare and often seasonal. Without prior knowledge of their location, locating such a source would be unlikely. The absence of vegetation in many areas indicates lack of accessible groundwater. As hours extended into days, the difference between planned travel and survival became more pronounced. Movement was no longer part of a journey. It was an attempt to reach any point of safety. At some stage, separation may have occurred. Reports from recovery efforts suggest that their remains were not found in the same immediate location. This indicates that either they became separated intentionally, possibly to search in different directions, or unintentionally due to differing pace and physical condition. If separation did occur, it would have further reduced their chances. Two individuals can share resources, monitor each other's condition, and maintain direction. Alone, each factor becomes more difficult to manage. The desert does not provide feedback. There are no indicators that a chosen direction is correct or incorrect until a destination is reached or missed. Without external reference, each step depends on assumption. Search efforts began after they failed to arrive at their expected destination. However, the delay between their initial disappearance and the start of organized search activity reduced the likelihood of timely recovery. The area they had entered was extensive. Without precise location data, search teams had to rely on probable routes. Meanwhile, the conditions in the field remained unchanged. Temperatures continued to rise during the day and fall at night. The terrain did not vary. The distance to safety did not shorten without correct direction. Their movement, based on available evidence, continued until physical limits were reached. There are no records of external assistance during this period. No confirmed encounters with other people or travelers. The area they had entered was not frequently used, especially during peak summer conditions. By the time search teams began to narrow their focus, the outcome had already been determined by the environment and the limitations of human endurance under those conditions. What remained was a path marked by absence of water, of shade, and eventually of movement. As time extended beyond the limits of available water, the physical condition of Egil Alex Torgerson and Emily Sweeney would have declined in a predictable pattern. In the environment of Death Valley, dehydration progresses quickly and without reversal once intake is no longer possible. The body's early responses include persistent thirst and reduced endurance. Movement becomes slower. Rest periods lengthen. As fluid loss continues, sweating decreases, which removes the body's primary cooling mechanism. Internal temperature rises. The risk of heat exhaustion and heat stroke increases. Cognitive function is affected alongside physical decline. Judgment becomes impaired. Navigation decisions grow less reliable. A path that appears logical may lead deeper into isolation. Landforms can seem familiar even when they are not. The ability to assess distance weakens. Evidence suggests that their movement continued beyond the point at which recovery would have been possible without external assistance. Items found along their route indicate progressive reduction of carried weight. This pattern aligns with increasing fatigue and the need to conserve energy. At some stage, the separation between them became definitive. Their remains were discovered in different locations within the same general region, but not in immediate proximity. This indicates that their final movements did not occur together. The reason remains uncertain. It may have resulted from differing physical capacities, disorientation, or an attempt to increase the chance that at least one would reach a road. Alone, the effects of dehydration intensify. There is no external reference to confirm direction or condition. The absence of shared resources accelerates decline. Without water, survival time in such conditions is typically measured in days. As the body approaches critical dehydration, symptoms become severe. Confusion deepens. Coordination deteriorates. The ability to continue walking diminishes. At this stage, individuals may stop seeking direction and instead remain where they can no longer proceed. The terrain where they traveled offered limited shade and no reliable water sources. There is no evidence that they located any form of natural supply. Without intervention, the progression toward heat-related failure would have continued uninterrupted. Search teams, working with incomplete information, focused on probable routes based on known entry points and vehicle recovery. The delay between disappearance and concentrated search reduced the likelihood of locating them while movement was still ongoing. When their remains were eventually found, the distances between key points, the vehicle, the recovered locations, and known roads provided a reconstruction of their final movements. These distances were greater than initial estimates might suggest when viewed on a map. The terrain increased the effort required to traverse them. No signs indicated successful navigation out of the canyon system. No evidence suggested contact with other people or discovery of a maintained route. The outcome was not the result of a single event, but of accumulated factors. Limited water, extreme heat, navigation uncertainty, and the decision to leave the vehicle combined over time. Each factor alone could be managed under different conditions. Together, in that environment, they were not. When Eagle Alex Torgerson and Emily Sweeney did not reach their expected destination, concern developed gradually. Missed check-ins and unreturned schedules led to formal reports. Authorities began coordinating search efforts within Death Valley National Park. Search operations in such terrain depend on limited information. Without a confirmed route, teams must rely on probability entry points, common paths, and known hazards. The desert complicates this process. Roads are numerous, many unmarked. Distances are large. Visibility from the ground is restricted by terrain. Their rented vehicle was eventually located along a remote, unmaintained road. It was stationary, intact, and identifiable. The discovery of the vehicle narrowed the search area, but also confirmed that they had left it. From that point, efforts shifted to tracing potential walking routes outward from the site. Air and ground teams covered sections of canyon systems and adjacent areas. However, the time that had passed reduced the likelihood of locating them alive. Environmental exposure leaves little trace beyond physical remains and scattered belongings. Over time, search efforts transitioned from rescue to recovery. Items consistent with their travel were found along a general route, indicating direction of movement. These findings allowed investigators to reconstruct portions of their path. Their remains were discovered separately within the same remote region. The locations confirmed that they had continued on foot for a significant distance after leaving the vehicle. No evidence suggested that they had reached a maintained road or encountered assistance. The final determination was consistent with environmental exposure. Heat and dehydration were identified as the primary factors. The search concluded without uncertainty about the outcome. Only the sequence of their final decisions required reconstruction. The final record of the incident involving Egil Alex Torgerson and Emily Sweeney is reconstructed from environmental evidence, search documentation, and the recovered vehicle. It forms a sequence that is incomplete in detail, but consistent in structure. The landscape of Death Valley does not preserve events in a detailed way. Wind shifts sand. Heat alters surfaces. Organic material decomposes quickly. What remains is shaped more by geography than by time. In this case, the key elements of the journey were reduced to distance and direction. A vehicle left behind, a path traced on foot, separate endpoints. These markers allow reconstruction of movement, but not of internal experience. The environment does not record thought or decision beyond its physical consequences. The outcome reflects a known pattern in extreme desert survival cases. Once separation from a functional vehicle occurs in high-temperature conditions, survival depends on immediate access to water and accurate navigation. Without both, endurance is limited. There is no indication of external influence or unexpected hazard beyond the environment itself. The factors involved were consistent with documented risks in the region. In official records, the case concludes without ambiguity. The sequence of events is understood in broad terms, even if some details remain uncertain. What remains is a cautionary outline of movement through a landscape that does not accommodate error. Roads in such regions are not only pathways but boundaries between safety and exposure. After the search ended, the desert returned to its baseline state. The wind continued across the basin, the heat remained seasonal, the routes remained unchanged, and the silence of the valley continued as it had before their arrival.